For the clarity of this story, I must mention that I have a hearing disability that has made me hard of hearing. I know that there are some things in life that I'll never understand, but I still look back on this experience wondering what could have happened and what I should have done differently. This all happened around a year ago. The holiday season had just rolled by, and I was settling down from traveling and all the get-togethers with family and friends. I live in a small suburban neighborhood that borders a forest in southern Quebec. It's a quiet area, as most of the residents are familiar with each other, which I honestly kind of prefer, as it adds a warmer atmosphere around winter. I like to take my dog, Monty, on walks in the local forest. He's a Rottweiler Husky mix, which is perfect for me since I enjoy going for runs from time to time. The forest has several trails, none of which are challenging for non-hikers. I remember it being an afternoon. I had just finished having a late lunch and decided to burn the calories on a walk with Monty. As usual, my dog goes ballistic when we turn the corner on my street towards the forest entrance. It was relatively cold for a February day. A fresh blanket of snow lined the paths overnight, creating this nearly blank canvas. As usual, I let my dog off the leash so he could run around. There were a few yellow patches along with some boot prints in the snow, which signaled to me that several people had already taken their dogs out earlier. Like, most people like to go on walks before noon, since the sun tends to set around 4. So I didn't expect to see anybody out at that time. After walking for around 30 minutes, we came to a fork in the path. I noticed that one of the paths hadn't been walked yet, so feeling semi-adventurous, I decided to take it. I have a pretty concrete memory of the trails, so I knew exactly where I was going. The trail led to a clearing, which was great since I wanted to check out the native birds with the binoculars I had gotten for Christmas. I remember scanning the surroundings until I saw a strange shape along the tree line in the distance. I focused my binoculars. I saw a blue tarpon, what looked to be a makeshift shelter. As curious as I was to check it out, it was getting dark and I wanted to get home. Turning around, Monty and I started walking back. As usual, he ran up ahead, but something seemed off in his behavior. He was much more alert and was sniffing the trail more than he normally would. From what I observed in the past, when I looked down at the trail, my eyes widened. There was a set of footprints in the snow, much larger than my own. I remember turning my boots over out of sheer confusion to compare them to the ones in the snow. The prints were different, which left me with even more questions. There were no other forks in the trail, so whoever took it had to have passed me at some point. I figured they must have passed me while I was using my binoculars. At the time, it seemed like the most logical explanation, so I tried not to overthink it. At this point, it was significantly darker outside, but I could still make out my surroundings. As we were walking back, Monty stopped abruptly and started barking relentlessly in my direction. As I turned around, that's when I saw him. There was a man, probably around 6'4", wearing charcoal-colored snow pants and a white camo jacket, only about a meter away from me. He didn't make any movements towards me. He just stood there with his hands in his coat pockets. I didn't recognize him from anybody in the neighborhood, so I assumed he must have been a hiker or someone from out of town. He looked like he was muttering something to me, but I couldn't read his lips due to the lack of lighting and not knowing if he was speaking English or French, which are the two commonly spoken languages in Quebec. I felt like an idiot at that moment for not bringing my phone with me, so I ended up trying to communicate with him that I was hard of hearing and that it was getting late. I got back home around 4:30. By then it was completely dark out. I remember following my standard night routine, not really thinking much about the encounter. But in the middle of the night, something happened that still shakes me to this day. I woke up to Monty licking my hand, which is something he usually does to get me out of bed in the morning. I tapped my phone to check the time and, to my surprise, it was 3:00. I noticed a message from my neighbor asking if everything was alright, which, if I'm being honest, confused me at first. The message was a few minutes old and asked if everything was alright, since Monty had been barking like he was possessed. I looked up from my phone to see that Monty was no longer in my room. I walked downstairs to find him barking hysterically at the patio door. As I approached the door, I struggled to see anything with my vision still blurry. I tried to focus my eyes when the motion sensor light turned on. At that moment, my heart sank. The man from the forest was standing there in my backyard. I didn't think twice to process any more questions. I stepped away from the door and texted 911. I don't think I've ever texted 911 faster than I did that night. I ran up to my room with Monty and grabbed the machete from under my bed. I'm a shorter woman with a background in martial arts, but I know damn well that the best move in a fight is to not fight at all. I sat there in my room, guarding Monty and myself, until the police came. With my heart beating out of my chest, I sat opposite from the door with Monty by my side. It didn't last long until Monty sprang up and started barking violently at the bedroom door. My hands were sweating profusely as I watched a shadow cast in from underneath the door. The movement in front of the night lights suggested the man was seconds from breaking into my room. Those had to be the longest minutes of my life, as I anticipated the door handle turning, or the door completely breaking in. Luckily for me, it never did. When the police arrived, I explained everything to them while they searched the property. The glass on the patio was smashed completely, but besides that, nothing was missing and everything was still relatively the same. The police found the gate in my backyard open. It leads to the forest, which is where they believe the man disappeared to. I let them know about the shelter I saw in the woods the day before. I took Monty and some of my belongings to stay with a family friend for a few days while I got the patio fixed. I never got a follow-up from the police after the incident, but ever since that day, I decided to stick to roads when walking my dog, not trying to think too much about the incident. My name is Amber Lay, and I'm a 16-year-old girl who lives in Illinois with my younger sister Kate, who's 15. My dad works for a deforestation group about 30 minutes from our house. It was a normal morning on December 5th, as my sister and I were getting ready to go out to the movies. We decided to go watch a somewhat new horror movie, Terrifier 3, which had some Christmas stuff included in it. We all knew it was 18, but nobody paid much attention. Plus, we looked older than we were. Anyway, we made our way to the movies and easily got in thanks to our appearance. However, halfway through the film, as everyone was anticipating the next scene, my phone buzzed loudly enough for the whole theater to hear, which really killed everyone's vibe as they all turned toward me with annoyed looks. My sister and I scurried out until I tripped, which was embarrassing enough. After we exited the theater, I checked my phone to see who called me. It was my dad, but instead of calling back, I received a text message that said something like, "Hey, would you mind bringing me some lunch, since the small cafe in the woods is shut today?" I looked over at Kate and she looked at me confused, but neither of us second-guessed the message since it seemed normal. We arrived home, packed some food for him, and took my car downtown to the woods. I've always loved that place and never felt uneasy there because it was large and secluded. The scenery was amazing, with a hill that laid down to a lake, perfect for fishing and photos. After a while, Kate and I got out of the car and we walked down the path through the woods. I took out my phone to call my dad, but he didn't pick up. Confused, I looked over at Kate, who was just as confused as I was. Why didn't he respond when he just called us at the movies? I decided to message him instead, reminding him that we were at the woods to give him his lunch. After a few moments, I saw the 3 little dots on the screen appear, showing he was typing. He responded by telling us to walk down the small hill and wait for him at the lake, which we followed. The sun was slowly setting since it was winter, so sunset came much earlier. The sky had a beautiful, radiant orange glow of the hill and down the mountain. Snapping out of my thoughts, Kate pointed down to the lake where a man in black was sitting on the deck by the water with his back to us. We guessed it was our dad. We walked down a bit more and stopped a little behind him. I called out his name, but he didn't move. Kate grew uneasy, and her attitude made the scene even more eerie. I slowly pulled off the hood he was wearing and revealed a man who definitely wasn't our dad. Kate and I shrieked as he turned around and began waving my dad's phone around like a maniac, smiling like he was happy to see us. Scared, I blurted out asking why he was using our dad's phone, but he didn't respond. Instead, he lunged and grabbed Kate's arm as she screamed. Luckily, I was strong enough to pull her away and we started running as fast as we could. The adrenaline pushed through us, so much that I had never seen either of us run that fast. Behind me, I heard stomps getting closer, so I knew we were being chased. I didn't dare to turn around. Finally, we reached the car. I slammed the door shut and locked it as the man came to my window, then crouched down out of sight as I reversed and sped away back home. When we got home, my dad and mom were there. We arrived panting, out of breath, and explained the whole situation to them. My dad was furious and said his phone had been stolen while he was working, so he decided to come back home. He said the man must have taken his phone and messaged us. My dad called the police and filed the report. They used the IMEI number to track the device, which was still on the deck by the lake, and they returned the phone to my dad. They said there wasn't much they could do since the phone was already found. I thought this was the end of it, but I wouldn't be telling this if it was. 6 hours later, round 1. Mike got an unknown message that said, "I like that your house is lit only by your bedroom TV." I immediately went cold and pale. I paused the TV and heard rustling outside my window. Mike, my room was on the second floor. I shut my phone and listened slowly. I peeked through the blinds and saw the man smiling with a gun pointed at my window. I screamed and pulled away as glass shattered everywhere across my room. My parents ran in, followed by Kate. I screamed for them to crouch and told them the man was outside with a gun. When my dad went to check, the man was gone. Then we heard another loud bang and more glass breaking downstairs in the kitchen. We ran unlocked the bedroom as Kate called 911. My mom hugged us as we cried in fear throughout the whole situation. I kept wondering how he knew where we lived. A few moments later, the police arrived and searched the whole house, but nobody was there. Kate and I explained the situation again, and one of the officers said they should check the car. Surprisingly, a small air tag was found on my tire, which explained how the man knew where we lived and why he crouched before I sped out of the woods. The police told us they would patrol the streets and do everything they could to find the man. A few months later, he still hadn't been found, but he never returned, which I hope stays that way. Me, Kate, and my parents are still traumatized by the situation, but mostly I felt stupid as the older sister, for not being alarmed when the person didn't respond to calls and only responded through texts. All I know is that I'll be more careful and never go to secluded places again, especially when I'm responsible for someone else's safety. It was 2021. One word to describe my day: hectic. Work was a shit show. This was prime COVID time, so I was working from home. I was supposed to be meeting with my extended family upstate, and I ended up finally getting off the nearly 3-hour Zoom meeting for work, a whole hour and a half after everyone else had already arrived at my parents' house, and that didn't include the next 2 hours or so the trek up to their house would take me. I filled up the cups of coffee in my kitchen to take with me before leaving. God knew I'd need them. The second I opened my front door, I realized this drive would be more of a shit show than I had originally thought. The snow and wind had already picked up since earlier that evening, and the streets were barely even plowed. The ground had at least 2 feet of snow already, and it was supposed to snow like this for a majority of the night. I had to be driving under 25 on most residential roads. My car at the time was also a really old, crappy Hyundai, which wasn't ideal for extreme weather conditions at all. It didn't have anti-lock brakes either. I'm a fast driver though, so when I got on the highway, I raised my speed to 70, which was probably a lot faster than safe for the conditions. I finally arrived at my parents' house around 9. They had begun dinner without me, but, thankfully, we're too far along. A few drinks and gift sharing later, I started to lose track of time. I got so caught up in seeing my relatives I hadn't spoken to in a while that I ended up basically forgetting I still have to drive home, even as most of my family had started to leave. Once I finally got in my car to leave, it was past midnight and at least another foot of snow had accumulated on the ground. I was buzzed, but I figured I was sober enough to drive home. Not that I condone drinking and driving at all. I was tired and simply wanted to get home. As I was heading towards the highway, I realized the roads were completely dead. I made the grave mistake of raising my speed to 40 down one particular road because, as I began to approach a bend in the road, I realized my car had gone into a skid. I tried not to panic, as this wasn't the first time I'd skidded. I started to steer into the skid and downshifted, but as I got even closer to the curve and my car still wasn't slowing down, I started to panic. My car went straight off the side of the road and into a tree, and the airbag deployed. I was momentarily in shock from the force of the impact, but thankfully, I was relatively unscathed. My car was ruined, though. The whole hood was buried in a bank of snow surrounding the tree I hit. No chance I was pushing it back onto the road or anything like that. The first thing I did was phone my roadside assistance company, and they said they'd send a truck to my location, but because of the horrible conditions, it could take up to 40 minutes for the truck to reach me. I was on a deserted road surrounded by forest and no houses for miles in either direction, so I decided to also call my parents and ask one of them to drive over and wait with me. My dad said he'd get in his car and doctor over, so then I hung up and waited. As I was sitting there, I began to hear something over the sound of the wind howling outside. There were undeniably footsteps in the snow. I couldn't tell exactly from where, but they sounded somewhat distant. I opened the driver's side door and stepped out, looking over the roof of my car. I wasn't hearing footsteps anymore. Instead, I was hearing some new sounds. It was kind of hard to describe, but it sounded like some kind of wet slurping. I looked over to where I thought the sound was coming from, and I could see some movement by the tree line. It was dark as hell though, but I was pretty certain I was looking at a person. I called out hello. The sound stopped, but no one called back. I sat there for a few more seconds awkwardly, but no one ever responded or appeared to me. I couldn't see any more movement either. I was officially freaked out, so I got back in my car and locked the doors. What couldn't have been a whole minute later, I heard footsteps in the snow again outside. Then, I heard something hitting the passenger side window, like a rock or something was thrown at it. I couldn't see out the passenger side window because it was covered in snow, or any of the windows for that matter. Once again, I opened the driver's side door and stepped out of my car, checking my immediate surroundings. I made a disturbing discovery. There were boot prints in the snow circling all around my car and then leading away from my passenger side door into the woods. I felt sick to my stomach. I also noticed there were drops of blood in the snow. I opened my driver's side door and then grabbed my knife out of the glove compartment. Clutching it in my right hand, I began to follow the prints leading into the woods. At that moment, I was convinced someone out there was with me. As I followed the prints, the drops of blood began to grow larger. It looked like someone had been bleeding profusely. And then I saw some dark mass lying in the snow just past the tree line. I couldn't tell what it was. I was just praying it wasn't a person. I took out my phone and enabled the flashlight. It wasn't a person. It was a dead deer, seemingly slaughtered by some larger predatory animal. The stomach was ripped completely open and, shockingly, the deer had been completely decapitated. I swept the flashlight over the surrounding few feet, but I didn't see the head anywhere. I decided this was getting too weird for me, and I started heading back to my car. I got back to my car and opened the driver's side door, and as soon as I did, it was all I could do to keep myself from vomiting on the spot. Lying in the driver's side seat of my car was the severed head of a deer, placed on the seat as if it was looking right at me. I booked it out of there and made it a few minutes down the road before headlights appeared in the distance. I ran towards the car, waving my hands and shouting like a madman, still holding my handgun. Thankfully, it was my dad, and he stopped the car and asked me what the hell I was doing. I got in the passenger seat and explained everything to him. And I kid you not, he literally didn't believe me. I felt more comfortable going back to my car with my dad now. So he drove the two of us over there and we got out. The footprints were still all around my car, but the deer head was gone. All that remained was a large spot of blood on my driver's side seat. I think once my dad saw that, he started to believe me. The deer corpse was also gone. All that remained were rag marks in the snow. The tow truck finally showed up and he towed my car. My dad asked me if I wanted to call the police, but honestly, I just didn't have the energy to file a police report. I was exhausted and just wanted to go to sleep. I figured calling the police wouldn't accomplish jack anyways. So that's my story. I have no idea who was in the woods that night and what they wanted. Maybe they were just trying to scare me, or maybe they had worse intentions. I love the sound of falling snow. It's kind of like watching lightning or seeing a shooting star. It's just one of those unique things you have no control over that doesn't always present itself. But when it does, it's a treat. I'm not really the hiking type, but when it's snowing out, I just can't help myself. We've all got those irresistible cravings. Night. This happened during one of those snowy nights. I live in a woody area. It's not really in the woods per se, but it's close enough. If I wanted to access an expansive, dense forest, I'd only have to drive a few minutes. I didn't have any major obligations the next day, so it was either a Friday or Saturday. Probably a Saturday, because I remember being slightly hungover from going out the previous night. It also wasn't supposed to snow that night, which I remember specifically because I have a habit of checking the weather obsessively during the winter months. I was sitting in my room reading a book when it just started snowing abruptly, as if someone had just casually flipped a switch. I didn't even notice it at first, but by the time I realized what was going on, there was already a considerable amount of snow on the ground. Without thinking too much, I instantly knew what I wanted to do: take a snow walk. So that's what I did. The spot I drove to is pretty secluded for the most part. It's a local hiking trail that usually doesn't see that much traffic. I stepped out, admired the snowfall for a few seconds, and started walking. I didn't really have a defined plan in my mind. My only objective was to get deeper into the woods so I could more fully appreciate the snow. After about 20 minutes of walking, I was finally satisfied with how far I'd gone. But then, the literal moment I stopped to appreciate the snow, I heard something that definitely didn't belong there. It was a child's voice. It took me a few moments to even process what I heard. Just as I was telling myself my mind was playing tricks on me, I heard it again. The sound of a little boy yelling hi. I know that sounds pretty benign, but it was just so freaky in the moment. It was quite literally the last thing I was expecting to hear out there, all alone in those woods. The other unsettling thing about it was that I couldn't really tell where the voice had come from. It sounded like it could have come from a number of different directions, if that makes any sense. I whipped my head around, but there was no one there. I kept looking around frantically, but there was no one in sight. Just as I was about to head back to my car, I heard the voice again. It was definitely a little boy's voice, only this time he said, "Up here, silly." Without even processing how freaky of a thing that is to say, I instinctively looked up, and there he was. There was a little boy who looked to be around 9 years old, just sitting on a tree branch in a tree not too far away. It was the most bizarre thing. The boy was clearly bundled up for the cold, but how he managed to climb that tree, I had no idea. The lowest branch to the ground was at least 20 feet off the ground. Strangely, seeing him kind of calmed me down a little. It was almost like I had been afraid of not knowing where he was, as opposed to him being there. I walked over to the tree he was sitting on, keeping my eyes on him the entire time. He was smiling this really wide grin that reminded me of the expression someone who hadn't learned to smile yet would make. Mike. My sense of security started disappearing the more I looked around, though. For starters, there wasn't a single footprint around the tree he was sitting in, meaning he had climbed up there before it had started snowing. meaning he had been sitting in that tree for at least 45 minutes. And that's not even mentioning the fact that he figured out a way to climb the thing in the first place. Like I said, it would have been exceedingly difficult to do so, even if you had climbing experience. The tree was perfectly straight. He would have had to shimmy up 20 feet. He waved at me, and I didn't waste a second. I asked him how he got up there, and he told me it was a secret. Then he just went back to smiling, that awful grin. I didn't know what to do. This kid clearly didn't belong out there, and I felt compelled to do something. But what was I supposed to do? Try and climb the tree to get him down? Before I could think of something to say, he stood up straight on the branch he had been sitting on and said, "Watch this." Then, without warning, he leaned back and fell. He fell what must have been at least 30 feet. I screamed. There was nothing else I could do. I watched in horror as he landed directly on his back with a gruesome thud. I thought he was dead. There's no way any amount of snow could have cushioned that fall. I ran over to him, but before I could reach him, he sprung up off the ground and started running away from me. It was impossible. Falling from that height should have been enough to kill him. I screamed again, this time out of shock, and I watched as he ran off deeper into the woods. Even with the bright snow on the ground, it was still dark enough for him to run out of sight. I don't know what came over me. Instead of doing the rational thing and turning around, I ran after him. I don't know why. I know myself, if a situation like that were to arise again, I turn around 99 times out of 10. But I guess this was just that one time. That's the only explanation I can come up with it. I regained my composure and started following his footprints, knowing he couldn't have gotten far. After a few seconds of running, I started to hear him laughing. Cackling is a better word, honestly. It was really unsettling. It was like he was toying with me, playing a game while I was out there scared to death. His footprints passed a nearby tree, and as I was running past, I felt something latch onto my back. Before I could react, I was tumbling to the ground and this kid was on top of me, clawing at my neck and shoulders. I started screaming and blindly grabbed at him, but he wasn't letting go. He started wailing too, and I could feel myself starting to bleed. He was tearing into my neck with his fingernails, and I thought he was going to blind me. I managed to stand back up and, with all my strength, I flung him over my shoulder. He hit the ground immediately, got up, and ran deeper into the woods, still laughing. This time I didn't chase him. If it weren't for the cuts on my neck and the blood on my hands, I might have just stood there forever. The cuts didn't feel that deep, but there was an uncomfortable amount of blood. I hadn't been wearing a scarf, so I pulled off my hat and wrapped it tightly around my neck. My hands were shaking and soaked with my own blood, and I was having a panic attack. The next 20 minutes are really fuzzy, probably because I was so terrified and I had lost so much blood. The next thing I remember is being in the back of an ambulance, and then after that, I remember talking to some police officers about what happened. I got the medical attention I needed and was asked to recount my story like 10 times. At the time, I didn't realize what was so unbelievable about it. I would only later learn that while I had been in the hospital, the police had searched the area and found nothing. What's worse, they allegedly followed my footprints and only found the one set, mine. I remember being so emotionally distraught when I found that out. I was furious at the thought that they hadn't searched the woods thoroughly. But why would they lie? By the time I was discharged from the hospital and done talking to police officers, I didn't have much energy to do anything other than sleep. I can't remember if this was the day after or 2 days after. Like I said, things got a bit fuzzy, but I eventually went back to that hiking trail. It had snowed considerably since then, so it wasn't too surprising to find that my footprints had been snowed in. I searched the entire forest. It must have taken me hours, but there was no sign anyone had been there. This is still one of the freakiest things that has ever happened to me, or anyone I personally know. This happened over winter break, my sophomore year of college. I was 19 and had the house to myself for a little under 2 weeks. During the second week, a massive snowstorm hit. The forecasts were predicting something crazy, and they definitely weren't lying. By the time I woke up that Saturday, there was already close to a foot on the ground, and it was still coming down hard. Plows couldn't keep up, and by late afternoon, the roads were basically impassable. I should mention that my neighborhood isn't your typical suburban setup. The houses are pretty spread out and there's a lot of wooded areas between properties. It's nice in the summer, but in the winter, it can feel kind of isolated. That day, with the snow piling up and no cars on the road, it felt even more so. I was bored out of my mind by like 0 p.m. The Wi-Fi knocked out while I was sleeping, so I couldn't even pass the time by playing video games or anything. For context, my only hometown friend is this guy named Ryan, and I knew he was around because I had literally hung out with him the day before that night. So while I was dying of boredom in my room, I got this idea that I thought was hilarious at the time. I was gonna walk to his house and surprise him. The roads were undrivable, sure, but I figured I could make it on foot. It was only about 1.5 miles, maybe a little more. I'd walked further than that plenty of times. Looking back, it was a pretty stupid idea, but I was 19 and bored and thought it would be funny to just show up on his doorstep covered in snow. The first part of the walk was actually kind of nice. The snow had stopped falling by then, and everything was covered in this thick white blanket. The streetlights had made everything glow, and it was weirdly peaceful. I could hear my own breathing and the crunch of my boots. But that was about it. There wasn't a living thing out there was. About halfway there, the route cuts through this stretch where there aren't any houses for a while. It's mostly just trees on both sides of the road and a few empty lots. During the day, it's nothing special, but that night, especially with all that snow, it felt different. That's when it really hit me how alone I was. It was a really strange feeling. I kept walking and out of nowhere, I saw headlights up ahead. The lights were pretty far off, but they were coming from the direction I was headed. I stopped walking and watched them get closer. It was definitely a snowplow, and it was moving really slowly. But then, out of nowhere, it suddenly veered hard to the right, like the driver had lost control or was trying to avoid something. I watched them cut across the road and disappear into the tree line. There was this muffled crunching sound, and then everything went quiet again. My first thought was that someone had just crashed, so I started running toward where I'd seen the lights go off the road. The snow was deep and I couldn't move that fast, but the only thing on my mind was the thought that someone was hurt and needed help. It took me a few minutes to reach the spot. I could see where the vehicle had gone off the road, so I followed the tire tracks until I found it. The scene looked exactly as I predicted, a snowplow with its front end crumpled and smashed into a tree. Its headlights were still on and the engine was still running. I ran up to the driver's side, preparing myself to have to lift someone through the snow. But when I got to the window and looked inside, there was no one there. But the driver's seat was empty. I stood there for a second, not really processing what I was seeing. I thought maybe the driver had been thrown from the vehicle or something, so I looked around. The windshield wasn't shattered though, so they must have still been inside the plow. I checked the passenger side, but that seat was also empty. I ended up pulling the driver's door open in frustration, thinking maybe they had slumped down below the steering wheel. But there was no one there either. It took me a few seconds to realize that the entire plow was empty. There was quite literally nowhere else someone could have been. I remember just standing there in the snow, staring at this wrecked snowplow with its headlights still on and its engine still running, feeling like something was very, very wrong. There were no footprints leading away from the truck. Whoever had been driving the thing had just vanished. It's hard for me to describe what I felt next. I got this sudden, overwhelming sense that I needed to leave. It wasn't a thought so much as a feeling, like something in my gut was forcing me to get out of there. I trusted my gut and backed away from the plow. As I was walking back the way I had came, I heard a voice ring out from somewhere behind me. It was a man's voice, and he was yelling for help. I wanted to turn around and help, That was my goal in the first place, but every instinct I had was screaming at me to keep moving. I started running, and as I got further away, I heard the voice yell out one more time. It sounded much closer the second time, like impossibly close. Like, no one could have moved that fast through such deep snow. I didn't turn around. I ran the entire rest of the way to Ryan's house. The joke was pretty much ruined at that point. I must have looked insane when his mom answered the door. I explained what happened, and Ryan's dad ended up calling the police. In the time it took the police to get out there and back amidst all that snow, Ryan and I had gone back and forth about what I'd seen probably a dozen times. He kept asking if maybe I imagined it, or if maybe the driver had walked away before I got there. But I knew for a fact that my eyes hadn't been playing tricks on me. When the police got to Ryan's house, they revealed something horrifying. Apparently, they hadn't found any tire tracks on that road at all. They had searched the entire road, but there was no sign that a plow had ever even been there. The officer actually accused me of making the entire thing up, and I had to argue my case. I was practically begging them to believe me. The officer ended up just leaving, and there was nothing I could do about it. I stayed at Ryan's that night. I didn't want to walk back home in the dark, and honestly, I don't think I could have even if I wanted to. The next morning, after the plows had finally cleared the roads, Ryan's dad drove me home. I've thought about that night a lot since then, and every time I do, I come to the unfortunate conclusion that what happened to me is just one of those unexplainable things. I guess it's possible that I hallucinated the whole thing, but that terrifies me just as much. I'm Sebastian, and I go by Say Bye. This happened back when I was a sophomore in high school, about 7 years ago now. I went to a private school in a nearby city, which meant I had to commute on public transportation every day. Train in the morning, train in the afternoon. It sounds tedious, but honestly, I didn't mind it. Most of my friends lived in the same general area, so we'd all ride together. And it became this social thing where we just hang out and talk during the commute. One of the hidden benefits of private school, honestly, getting people accustomed to commuting early in life. I was a runner back then, track in the spring, cross country in the fall. During the off season, I'd catch the train right after school let out around 3. Light, bizarro, and it would be pretty empty, usually just the same group of high schoolers heading home. But during the season, practice wouldn't wrap up until after 5:30, which meant by the time I got on the train, it was packed with commuters heading back to the suburbs after work. Luckily, my 2 best friends, Charles and James, also rack and lived on the same train line, so I wasn't completely alone during those late rides. One night after track practice, it started snowstorming the moment our train left the station. It was midwinter, so night is definitely the right term, even though it wasn't even 6. And snowstorm is also the right term, because it went from 0 to full-on blizzard in like 5 minutes. We found out while we were on the train that ours was the last one operating on that track. The forecast was predicting a massive storm, and they weren't letting any more trains leave the station after us. The snow only got worse. At one point, the 3 of us were genuinely wondering if the train was even going to make it to each of our stops. And even so, we quickly realized there was no way our parents could drive to pick us up. The roads were already a mess. So even if we made it to our respective stations, we'd have no choice but to walk home. For James and Charles, that wasn't a huge deal. They were practically next-door neighbors in a pretty lively, dense part of town. Plus, their houses weren't that far from the station. For me though, it was different. My station was isolated. I'd have to cross a highway and then walk over a mile in this woody stretch to get home. I called my parents from the train and explained the situation. They told me I didn't have much of a choice. My dad told me to just suck it up, bundle up, and be careful. James and Charles got off at their stop, and I tapped them goodbye. The rest of the ride was just me and a handful of other passengers, and by the time we reached my station, I was the only one left. The doors opened and I stepped out onto the platform. It was completely empty, just me and a full blizzard. It was dark, but there was decent visibility because of the snow. Everything was white, and the light from the station reflected off of it in this pretty, but eerie way. I stood there for a second taking it in. It was a sight I had never seen before. Usually, that station is bustling with cars and people, but with the snowstorm and all, it looked completely deserted. I started walking. There was no point in prolonging the inevitable. For whatever reason, I thought crossing the highway would have been more difficult, but there wasn't a single car anywhere in sight, including snowplows. I actually stopped and looked around, kind of in awe. It was beautiful, in a weird way. I started thinking to myself I'd probably never experience anything like that ever again. After the highway, though, came the woods, dude. The only other option was following the road home, but it was really windy and would have added a ton more walking, so I decided to just push through and walk through the woods. I don't know how long I'd been walking, but I happened to glance up after looking down at my feet for a while, and the moment I did, I had to hold back a yell. About 30 yards ahead of me, there was someone standing. There was a man. He was facing me directly, almost like he knew the exact path I had to take. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing because he wasn't dressed for the weather at all. He was wearing a short-sleeved shirt and shorts in the middle of a blizzard. And to make things worse, his face was twisted in this deranged smile. I didn't move. I just stood there watching him, waiting to see what he was going to do. My mind was racing, trying to come up with some explanation. But the shock of the situation was too much for me to handle. I couldn't think or move. And in one abrupt motion, he went from smiling and standing still to screaming and charging at me. It was literal horror unfolding right in front of me. I snapped out of my haze and began running as fast as I could back the way I came, screaming for help even though I knew no one was out there. I couldn't move that fast with all the snow, and I felt him closing the gap with every second that passed. The chase felt like it lasted forever. It was probably 5 minutes, but it felt like an hour. I finally broke out of the woods and hit the road, and only then did I turn around. He was gone, and that didn't make me feel much better though. I felt physically sick. I followed the road home, and the whole time I kept thinking about my footprints, about how they were quite literally the only tracks in the snow. If that guy wanted to follow me home, it would have been the easiest thing in the world. When I finally got to my house, my parents were relieved. That is, until I told them what had happened in the woods. My dad wanted to go out and look for the guy, but my mom wouldn't let him. Several hours went by without incident. Eventually, my parents went to sleep. I pretended like everything was fine, but I was still freaking out internally. I couldn't get the image of his deranged smile out of my head, and the way he had been screaming was just so unnatural. And the more I thought about it, the more insane the whole thing felt. He had literally been wearing short sleeves. How had he not frozen to death out there? I was making myself crazy, so I forced myself to stop thinking about it and just go to sleep. But of course, I couldn't fall asleep. It was like I was in that 30-second shock after waking up from a nightmare. Only instead of 30 seconds, it was several hours. That's the best way I can describe how I was feeling. At one point, I heard a tree branch rattle my bedroom window, which startled me out of bed. I went over to the window to see if I could dislodge it somehow. I pulled back the curtain and literally dropped to the floor yelling. It was him, that guy from earlier. He was right there inches from my window. Only now I could see him clearly. His skin was purple like he was freezing to death, and he was bald with a patchy gray beard. My dad burst into the room and just barely saw the guy through the window before he took off. My dad went to go run out in the snow, but my mom stopped him and convinced him to call the police instead, which he did. With all the snow on the ground, it took the police forever to get to our house. By the time they did, that guy was long gone. My dad didn't care though. The police could have easily tracked his footprints in the snow, which is what I was expecting them to do. But once the officers realized the tracks led into the woods behind our house, they told us they couldn't just go tramping through the woods in the middle of the night. My dad got furious. He got in one of the officers' faces and almost made it physical. In the end, the officers literally left without doing a thing. Nothing ever came of it. The police never bothered to follow up, and I never saw that man again. For all I know, he froze to death somewhere behind my house. But for weeks after that, I was terrified to be in my own home. I still have absolutely no idea how to explain what happened. My name is Mike, and this happened last year when my fiancée and I bought our first starter home together. We're an Asian couple, which is relevant to the story. It was a small, two-story house in a basic suburban town in Georgia. There was nothing special about it, but to us, it was supposed to be special. It was a typical quiet street, decent backyard, cheap fence, and regular-looking houses lined up next to each other. We felt lucky to even buy a house at our age. So it was a very exciting point in our lives that was quite literally robbed from us, which you'll soon hear why. The first few days were normal. We unpacked, met a few neighbors, and tried to settle in. The neighbor on our right side was a friendly older couple. The neighbor across the street waved and came across to say hi when he saw us. But the house on our left side was different. We didn't see anyone come out of it for the first few days. The curtains were always shut. The house looked clean and normal, don't get me wrong, but it was always kind of dark inside, like no one was home, even though there was a car in the driveway. The only time we noticed anything was when we saw someone standing inside their front window. One afternoon, my fiancée and I were carrying groceries in from the car when she whispered something to me about it. I looked over and saw a man standing behind the curtain, only half visible, but totally watching us. He didn't wave. As soon as he saw us glance at him, he walked away from the window. It was weird, but we didn't think too much about it. Some people are just quiet or awkward. Over the next week, we started noticing him more often, not outside, but inside his house. I would catch him standing in his living room window sometimes when I left for work. My fiancée told me she saw him in the upstairs window once when she was getting the mail. Every time we noticed him, he seemed to be watching us, but never in a way where he stayed long. The second we looked back, he was gone. One night, something happened that made both of us uneasy in a way we couldn't ignore. Around midnight, I was getting ready for bed when I walked past our upstairs window. Our bedroom window faced directly toward his house. When I looked out of habit, I saw him in his upstairs window. This time, he wasn't halfway hidden or standing behind a curtain. He was fully visible. He stood straight up, with his face turned toward our bedroom window. I froze for a second because I wasn't sure if I was actually seeing it right. But the second he realized I saw him, he stepped back away from the window. I remember saying to my fiancée with a laugh, "Oh great, our neighbor's a creep." The next morning, the man came to our door. It was the first time we saw him outside. He knocked politely and introduced himself as Gordon. He apologized for looking like he was spying the night before that night. He told me he had been putting something on his window legend. Didn't mean to look into our room. He smiled the whole time, and it was a welcoming enough smile to give me a bit of relief. I'm not saying I loved the guy instantly. There was definitely something slightly off about him, but the apology was appreciated. I didn't want to be rude, so I told him it was fine. When I went back inside, I told my fiancée he seemed somewhat nice, but a little weird. We decided to forget about it. A week later, something else happened that we couldn't ignore. In the middle of the night, my fiancée shook me awake, telling me she heard someone in the yard. I was half asleep, but I got up to check the window. Gotta do what you gotta do as the man of the house. When I looked outside, I saw someone walking in our yard. Unless it was fucking Bigfoot, it was definitely a person, a full-grown man, walking around like he was looking for something. My first reaction was to shout out, "Hey," even though I knew that wasn't the smartest thing to do. As soon as I yelled, the person walked fast toward the gate and slammed it shut behind him. Since we didn't have anything in the backyard yet besides some gardening tools, I didn't think someone was trying to steal anything, and I didn't bother to check the backyard. I did check the front windows though, and didn't see anyone. I didn't go outside because I didn't feel safe, and eventually, my fiancé and I went back to sleep, even though we felt uneasy. A few nights after that, the same thing happened again. My fiancé woke me up, telling me she heard rustling outside. Right. This time, we both heard it clearly. It sounded like someone was shimmying something. I can't say what, but the best description I could give was some kind of lock. I went to the window again and sure enough, I saw someone in the backyard. I felt my whole body tense up. This time I yelled that I was calling the cops. The person walked out of the yard and again slammed the gate the same way. But this time, I saw enough of the man's face and posture to know it looked exactly like Gordon. I yelled, "Gordon," but he didn't respond. He just walked away like nothing happened. This time I went outside. I checked the yard, then the sides of the house. I took a deep breath and told myself, I have to confront this now. I walked over to Gordon's house and knocked. He answered within seconds, which told me he was awake the whole time. He smiled like he always did and started laughing while telling me that it was him in the yard. He said he was chasing away kids who always jumped the fences in the neighborhood, and he caught them jumping from his backyard into our backyard. He said it happens all the time and told me I'd get used to it. He kept smiling the whole time, but something about the smile didn't feel normal. It felt like something was behind it. I saw hate in his eyes. I swear, I didn't argue with him. I just told him I understood and went back home. But deep down, I didn't believe a word he said. The next day, he came over again and invited us to come to his house for Chinese food the next night, which would be a Friday. We felt like saying yes would at least clear the awkwardness between us and we could just be cordial neighbors. We went to his house around 7 p.m. that Friday. The second we walked in, the atmosphere felt uncomfortable. Gordon seemed relatively intoxicated and got only more drunk as he kept sipping more wine. He said he ordered a bunch of Chinese food and made a little weird comment like, "I know you guys love Chinese food," then left. He made little passive-aggressive comments here and there. Eventually, the food arrived and he paid. We offered to help him set up the table, but he almost yelled when he said, "No." The whole dinner felt tense. Then, as he finished more and more wine, he started acting more differently. He started making rude comments that were less passive and more direct. He said things that made it pretty clear he didn't like that an Asian couple moved into the neighborhood. At first, we tried ignoring it, hoping it would stop. But then he got louder and more angry. I mean it. He actually started getting himself angry as he talked about how this town had a history of being white. He started saying things that made both of us feel unsafe, honestly. Then he told us that it was, in fact, him going into our backyard those nights. He didn't deny it or try to hide it. The climax of the night was when he yelled at us that we were not welcome there and that the neighborhood wasn't for people like us. At that point, we didn't say anything. We just stood up and left. We walked back to our house as fast as we could. We didn't even talk about it until we were inside with the doors locked. We didn't know what to do except go to the other neighbors, so we walked door to door asking them about Gordon. Some of them were shocked when we told them what happened. Others weren't surprised at all. A few people told us Gordon was a drunk whose wife left him years ago. It didn't make us feel any better, because we were living next to him now. Wait, we tried to avoid him after that. Wait, we didn't look at his house. Wait, we didn't go outside unless we had to. But how long could you avoid your next door neighbor? Every night felt tense, like he could be watching us or trespassing again. Then one night, a brick was thrown through our downstairs window. It shattered glass all over the living room. We both jumped out of bed when we heard it. When I ran downstairs, the brick was lying on the floor. No note attached or anything. just a brick. But we knew it was gone. There was no one else it could have been. But we had no proof. We filed a police report. The police came to talk to him, but he denied everything. He acted confused and told them he had nothing to do with it. The police couldn't do anything except document the incident. We talked about putting up cameras and staying to fight it out. But honestly, we were too scared, and this was mentally exhausting already. We both felt like something worse would happen if we stayed. Not even 2 months after moving in, we started packing again. We couldn't live next to someone who hated us and had already gone into our yard at night and then thrown a brick at our house. Before we left, we filed another report explaining everything. The police said they would keep an eye on the situation, but we didn't feel protected. We moved out of that house and out of that neighborhood as fast as we could. We left behind the home we thought would be our first chapter in life together. I still think if we stayed there, you'd have eventually heard of my fiancé and I on the news having been murdered by this man. I wish it wasn't illegal to DOX people. Boy, would I love to drop his address in the story. All we can do now is move on and upward from here. This story happened a couple of years ago, around late 2021. My name is Noah, and me and my fiancée Gabby, who is now my wife, had moved into a new house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. It was a nice two-story house, perfect for our future family. The neighbors seemed friendly and welcoming as well. Most notably, the neighbors that lived to the right of us seemed the friendliest. It was a couple in their late 30s, but I wasn't really sure. The husband's name was Daniel and his wife was named Veronica. They were very friendly and seemed like sweet people. They even baked us a red velvet cake as a little welcoming gift. The cake was really good, and we couldn't thank them enough for it. The first couple of weeks were good in the new neighborhood. It was quiet and peaceful until we started noticing strange things with our neighbors, Daniel and Veronica. One night around 11, light shouting coming from outside. I looked out my bedroom window and realized it was coming from their house, like they were arguing. I couldn't see them because the angle of the houses blocked my view. Eventually, I saw Veronica storm out to her car and leave. After that, it was quiet again. I told Gabby about it, and we just chalked it up to them getting into an argument and Veronica leaving to cool off. I was kind of concerned because they seemed like such sweet people, not the type to have heated arguments, but every couple has disagreements. We didn't think too much of it. Later on that same week, Gabby and I were coming back home. When we got out of the car, we heard yelling coming from inside their house again. They had their main door open, but the storm door was closed, so we could hear them arguing clearly. Again, it wasn't our business, so we ignored it. Then one day, I noticed Veronica's car wasn't there for a few days, but I assumed maybe she was on vacation. Daniel was still there because his car stayed parked, and I would see him go out once in a while. But then it became a week, then 2 weeks, and Veronica's car was still gone. My wife noticed too and thought maybe they got divorced or something, which would make sense due to their constant arguing. But the way she left was so sudden. One day her car was there, the next it was gone, and Daniel was acting weird. Every time we saw him, he would try to avoid us. He wouldn't wave like neighbors usually do, and the rare times I talked to him, he would talk fast and try to end the conversation as soon as possible, like he was nervous. Something was definitely up with him. After 3 weeks of Veronica being gone, I decided to go over and ask Daniel how things were. My fiancé argued against it, saying it wasn't our business and to leave it alone. But curiosity got the best of me, and I knew she was curious too. So I rang his doorbell. I knew he was home because his car was there. It took him almost 3 minutes to answer, and when he did, he looked off. He was sweating like he just ran a marathon, and he had this weird forced smile, like he was hiding something. I asked him about Veronica and why I haven't seen her or her car in a while. He hesitated and said, she just went to go stay with her mom for a while out of state because she's very sick and she's looking after her. I felt like that was a lie, but I didn't question it. I might have believed him if he wasn't acting so strange. I then asked why he was sweating so much, and he said he was doing workouts upstairs. He was speaking really fast, like he was rushed or nervous. But then something happened that made my heart drop. I heard a voice scream from somewhere inside the house. I wasn't exactly sure where, but I was almost positive it was a woman's voice yelling for help. I asked what that was, and Daniel quickly said, "Oh, I'm playing a movie upstairs and forgot to pause it." That made no sense, since he had just said he was working out upstairs. I just said, "Okay," and told him I would catch him later. I went back home and told Gabby everything. She was just as concerned as me and told me to call the cops. I did, and I requested to stay anonymous, even though Daniel would probably know it was me. I told the dispatcher that I heard something in my neighbor's house and wanted them to do a welfare check. Right. Eventually, an officer pulled up. About 10 minutes later, I heard sirens and saw 5 police cars and an ambulance. Me and Gabby rushed outside. Officers were everywhere. Daniel was being taken away in handcuffs while Veronica was being rushed to the ambulance on a stretcher. We later found out Daniel and Veronica had been in an abusive relationship, and things had escalated badly. Daniel kept her locked in the basement for weeks. I didn't even know they had a basement down there. He would assault her, abuse her, and do horrible things. He even sold her car to make it look like she wasn't home. When I heard that scream while talking to him, it turned out he stabbed her 5 times because she had made noise when he told her to be quiet while he answered the door. That explained why he was acting so strange. Unfortunately, Veronica didn't survive and passed a couple hours later. As Daniel was being escorted into a police car, he said, "I know it was you who snitched out on me, and you'll regret this." I wanted to laugh it off, if the situation wasn't so messed up, knowing he would be behind bars for a long time. It's crazy how you never know who people truly are behind closed doors. Daniel seemed like a friendly, normal guy, and so did Veronica. They seemed like a great couple, but obviously they had serious issues hidden underneath. Fast forward a couple nights after the incident. I woke up in the middle of the night. It was dark, and I saw the silhouette of a person. As my eyes adjusted, I saw that it was Daniel. My heart dropped. He said, "I told you you would regret this." He was holding a knife. I tried talking him down, telling him to calm down and just talk, but he didn't respond. I pressed myself against the headboard. Then out of nowhere, he lunged at me. I screamed and then I woke up for real. I was breathing heavily and Gabby was beside me. She asked what was wrong, and I said it was just a bad dream. She went back to sleep, but I couldn't. The fact that I dreamed about my neighbor, who murdered his wife, breaking into my house to kill me chills me to this day. Most dreams fade, but this one stayed vivid. And the words he said in the dream were the exact same ones he said while being taken away in cuffs. I never told my wife about this dream. I don't know why. I guess because she might think I'm crazy or it would just stress her out. Eventually, after we got married, we moved to another part of town. It's a nice quiet neighborhood and a great house, but the whole event traumatized us. Knowing we lived next to a murderer still haunts us. My name is Devin, and this happened 2 years ago when I was 24 and living in a duplex in Queens, New York. It was a small, old house that looked divided right down the middle. I rented the left side, and some man rented the right side. I never met him. I never even saw him. The landlord said he kept to himself and worked nights, so it didn't concern me. My bedroom was on the 2nd floor, and the wall of my bedroom was the same wall as the neighbor's bedroom. If I pressed my ear up to the wall, I could hear faint movements on the other side sometimes, but that's to be expected in New York City. The first week that I lived there, nothing strange happened. I worked long hours, came home tired, ate something simple, and went straight to bed. I was just happy to have my own place. And then one night, things began. I was lying in bed scrolling on my phone when I heard what sounded like a man talking, but it didn't sound like a normal man's voice. It was high-pitched, like someone trying to talk in a fake voice. It was faint, and it was being spoken from the other room, but the wall was so thin that it felt like the person was standing right next to me. I couldn't understand what he was saying. It was just this weird high voice mumbling. I tried to ignore it. Maybe he was on the phone, or maybe he was watching something on TV. Eventually, the mumbling stopped and I fell asleep. A few nights later, though, the mumbling came back, but this time it was louder, and this time it was definitely a man talking. I pressed my ear lightly to the wall and listened. It didn't sound like he was on the phone. It sounded like he was talking to himself. I didn't know whether to laugh or be slightly creeped out. To block the noise out, I put the blanket over my head. I had work early the next morning and I needed sleep. I think that was the first night I realized I did not like living there alone. 2 weeks after that, the knocks started. I was lying in bed again, half asleep, when I heard the taps on the wall right next to my head. It was so close that I flinched, like someone was touching me. I sat up and waited a few moments in silence. And then there were 2 more identical taps on the wall from the other side. I knew for sure that it was not a house-settling noise that could just easily be explained away. I rolled away from the wall and sat there shaking. I kept waiting to hear something else, but it went quiet. I wanted to knock back, but I realized that acknowledging it would likely make it worse. The next morning, I told myself it was not a big deal and that I was overreacting. Over the next week, the knocks continued, sometimes soft, sometimes harder, always at night and always when I was trying to sleep. One night it went on for so long that I put in headphones and turned on a loud fan. I remember lying awake, thinking about how thin the wall was, how close his room was, how close he was. He could literally be lying just a feet away from me. It scared me more every night. But still, the knocks could have just been him sitting against the wall and accidentally banging or tapping the wall with something. But then came the night that everything changed. I'll never forget it. I was lying in bed on my side facing the wall. But my eyes were closed, but I was not asleep yet. The room was dark except for my street lamp shining through the blinds. I heard the knocks again, 3 slow ones. I kept my eyes closed and tried not to react. Then I heard that same high-pitched man's voice come through the wall. It was muffled, but not that muffled. I could hear each word clear enough. He said, "What are you doing in there?" My lungs locked up. I sat straight up in bed, shaking so hard I felt my teeth shattering. This was no longer just potential accidental taps on the wall. He was now acknowledging me directly. He said it straight through the wall. I could just tell he said it like he knew I was right next to him. I grabbed my phone and called my boyfriend. I whispered to him that I was scared out of my mind and told him exactly what happened. He told me he was coming over right away and he would stay the night with me. I stayed sitting up with the lights on until he arrived. The rest of the night, nothing happened. It was almost worse that way. It made me feel crazy, like the neighbor knew my boyfriend was there. For a few days, things were quiet. I started thinking maybe it was just some weird coincidence that the neighbor was doing something and I misheard. But then a few nights later, something happened that made me leave the house running. I still have bad dreams about it. I was asleep this time, fully asleep. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but I woke up fast. Something snapped me awake. I sat up slightly and then it started, the knocks on the wall, like someone drumming their fingers right beside my head. I screamed back without thinking. I shouted for whoever it was to leave me alone. I was shaking and breathing hard. I think mustering up the courage to finally yell back spiked my adrenaline. I don't know exactly what I expected next, but I will tell you what did happen next. I never expected in a million years. There was a voice. It came from inside my room. A voice in the dark said, "Go to sleep." It was not the voice from the wall. It was deeper and closer, right there in my room. I launched off my bed screaming. For some reason, the brief moments of my running through the hallway and down the stairs was a blur. Because I really just remember getting outside and running into the streets, screaming for help over and over and over and I must have looked insane. I ran barefoot onto the sidewalk. I kept looking behind me, expecting someone to be chasing me. I didn't stop screaming until a man 2 houses down came outside and stared at me like he didn't know what to do. I begged him to let me use his phone to call my boyfriend, but he said by the sound of it, I needed to call the police. So I called the police instead. I waited by that man's sidewalk, shaking and crying until the police arrived. When they showed up, I told them everything that happened. They asked me if I was sure that someone was in the house. And I said, yes, 100% yes. Wait, they drove me back to my duplex and officers went inside. My front door was still wide open like I left it before that night. I said there were no signs of forced entry. They asked me if I remembered unlocking the door as I ran out. I had no memory of touching the lock. I told them I didn't think I unlocked it, but I was so panicked that maybe I did. I couldn't be sure. They checked every room, every closet, under the bed, everywhere. No one was in the house. They knocked on the neighbor's door too, but he wouldn't open up. It looked like he wasn't home at all. Eventually, my boyfriend showed up and took me back to his place. I was still shaking hours later. I don't remember sleeping again the rest of the night. In the morning, I called my landlord and told him everything. I told him I needed to know who the neighbor was and if he had any history of problems or strange behavior. I also told him I wanted to break the lease immediately. At first, he pushed back. He said he needed notice and paperwork. I told him I would not step foot in that duplex alone again and he needed to help me. It took a whole day of phone calls before he said he would let me break the lease. My boyfriend came with me every single time. I went back to the duplex to move my stuff. I refused to go alone. During those days, we tried knocking on the neighbor's door multiple times, but he never answered. It was like no one lived there, but there were signs that someone did, like packages at the door and a car in the driveway. But no human response. I ended up moving back in with my parents for a while, until I found a new place. I still don't know if that neighbor was actually in my room that night, or if someone got in without the police noticing, or if it was just all in my head from the stress. But that one's the least likely explanation because it's pretty clear what's real and what's in your head. Like my landlord told me later that the neighboring tenant eventually moved out too, without saying a word. I don't know what really happened in that duplex.